when Magnus Bogner came up with this crazy idea of buying the Australian exchange, what were the processes that he needed to go through internally to get a buy-in in the first place?
We have a very active and involved board. So our board is very involved with most of our activity in terms of anything that is strategic. So we had to go through several rounds of reviews with the board. We had to go through several rounds of reviews with our risk management committee. And so that's the process that it's no different than any other company, so it's really the board.
But it was a life-changing proposition, so I'm sure the process would have been a little bit
like
more
I said,
rigorous.
we've been through a series of should we do this kind of review. So internally to us, this was, like I said, this went a little further, but it's not the first one we've looked at, and therefore our processes for looking at it, the processes for dealing with our regulator to say why we are doing this, those have all been in place because we've done quite a few what ifs or should we do this. And finally, whether the bid gets made and whether it's public, like I said, out of every 4 or 5 you try, probably one goes this far. And probably, hopefully, out of the 7 that you try, one will happen.
And what's the sense of governance relative to the responsibility to shareholders? Because you ramped up the share price, and then now it's going to find another leveling ground, perhaps.
Yeah, first thing, I don't think we can ramp up our share price, right? It's the marketplace that looks at the value of your company over time.
But you come up with ideas that ramps up your share price.
Sorry?
You come up with ideas that
Yeah, sure. With performance that hopefully provides an indication of what you could deliver in the future. And again, exchanges around the world went through a big up and down. So if you compare us with the index of exchanges around the world, we've done a little better than that. And if you compare us against the index of the STI, we've done a little better than that. So that's kind of how we measure ourselves. Are we keeping pace with the world exchange indices? Are we keeping pace with the STI? And so those are our 2 benchmarks, if you will. And separate from that, we have our kind of goals on return on equity, and we have a very good return on equity.
You are in some ways Asia's perfect exchange. You have all the infrastructure in place, you have all the joint ventures in place, you've got all the technology in place and so on. You're not small, as in many of the local brokers are, and neither are you large, as many of the global bosses are, and in fact, the Hong Kong exchange would be much larger. And if you look at the formulas that make them successful, the ones that are smaller are actually closer to their marketplace, and the ones that are larger actually very successful on the back of very simple product sets. In the case of Hong Kong, it's a China story. Singapore, as a country, seems to have become successful on the forex part of the business, and I think that you're taking on a number of the derivatives, a number of the futures products quite successfully in that sense. Give us a sense of your relationship with the Singapore government and the Singapore regulators, and what is their sense of what the marketplace should look like. Given the fact that you have built so much infrastructure, would they like to see more product sets go through you, or are they really open to new electronic channels and electronic exchanges coming on board and take an open market feel sort of an approach? Are they moving towards that?
So I'll answer this with 2 examples, right? The first one I will use is the context of OTC trading of financial derivatives. Now, from the time of the last financial crisis to now, that's where most regulatory focus has been on, and how do you get these either onto a clearinghouse or onto an exchange, the Dodd-Frank implications to the banks in Asia and so on. So if you take the SGX approach there, we kind of look at this as, again, a process that will bring more and more of the settlements onto a CCP and onto a clearinghouse. We don't think the trading will go onto an exchange. Therefore, what we have done is we've become a CCP that today clears interest rate swaps, and we are the first one to do that, and we are the only one to do that outside of LCH and CME, who were always in that business.
The relationship between you and the CEO of Singapore Exchange, is the CCP your initiative as opposed to
No, the way we
core
run it,
business?
no, the way we run it is the two of us who are presidents and then there's the CEO. And the three of us share quite a lot of the responsibilities. Right now, the way to think of it is Magnus is very externally focused. Gan is focused on building what you would call the trading marketplaces, the securities and the derivatives. And I'm focused on ensuring our infrastructure can cope with everything that we want, and in terms of kind of charting a path for us on our clearing business and where regulatory impact is going to come to us. And so I work pretty closely with the development arms of MAS as well as with the regulatory part of it in terms of deciding where Singapore should position itself as well as, the approvals we need to run these businesses.
So the entire CCP initiative is your baby?
I wouldn't say that. It's kind of an investment that was approved by our board. It was something that Fuwa and I started together, and it's something that Magnus, Gan, and I run together. So the reason it kind of looks more like my baby is because it has a lot of technology and it has a lot of execution to be done before we could launch it. And so it took us about 18 to 20 months to get that done. And yet we are probably a couple of years ahead of anyone else who can kind of get that done. So the executional part of it falls mainly under the areas I run. But if you take the cultivating of the banks, and interestingly, all the global banks in Singapore are members with us, and that was an area of uncertainty whether they would want to become members in a clearing house, whether they would support the need to clear these instruments. But the way they all look at it, which I think is very logical, is that should the Dodd-Frank implication mean that they have to clear most of these derivatives that they trade, what they did not want to be in was in a situation where they couldn't clear the trades with their Asian counterparties. So that's where our members are both the Asian banks and the global banks, and the two meet here. And so what it ensures is that in the long run, they can continue to do the businesses they do in Singapore and in Asia without a threat of either having to curb it because of Dodd-Frank implications or lack of capital available for them to do those businesses.
What happens if another exchange looks at you, and especially from a larger marketplace, the Tokyo Exchange or the merged entity with New York and so on? They look at you and they say, what a beautiful little exchange this is. It gives us connectivity, it gives us ubiquity, it gives us access to all of these pioneering initiatives in the exchange world, and we want to make a bid for Singapore Exchange. Is Singapore Exchange as open to being a subject of a bid as you were in pursuing a bid with Australia?
Yeah, we don't have a particular block against being subject of a bid, right? I mean, and the key is the joint business vision over time. What does that do for the Singapore Exchange stockholder? What does it do for Singapore? What does it do for our members? And I think that as long as those constituents are well served, we have no particular reason not to engage in anybody who wants to kind of look at us.